Okay, wonderful. Good evening, dear students. I hope you're doing very well. Today it's you know, Monday night. It's very I would say the climate's very much template. It's not that much warm nor is that much cold, so it's a very good night to learn and to be in classes, okay? So good evening to all of you. I am very happy that you are with me tonight. I am very excited as well because we are starting with a new group here in these classes. Welcome to all those new students that are taking part of these courses. As I told you yesterday in our introductory class, today we're going to begin with the reading section. Okay, we're going to get into all details, into all the information and data you need to know in order to approach this particular section efficiently and effectively. Okay, so we're going to know more about this section today. Remind that today it's Tuesday, and because of that, we're going to have theoretical classes. That is to say, tomorrow we're going to practice everything we learned today. But for today's class, we're going to get into a lot of details and information about the reading section, and we're going to learn the different types of questions you're going to find, what general recommendations do I have for you, everything. Okay, so please stay with me and welcome again. All right, so I'm going to share my screen with you. Remind that at every point you are able to to question everything. If you have any type of hesitation, of concern, tell me, okay? You can raise your hand and I'm going to be helping you. Maybe you want me to clarify something in Spanish too. Of course, that I'm going to be able to help you with that. So everything or any particular concern, you raise your hand and I'll help you, okay? Remind to those of you who are new, very important to have your cameras on, okay, during the class, so that we are making sure that you're taking advantage of all the classes, okay? So please turn your cameras on, and now I'm going to begin, all right? So accompany me, please. I'm going to get into my presentation. We have it. Okay, here it is. Wonderful. So let's get into this. The TOEFL reading section, okay? So this is a very interesting section. It's one of the most, demanding for so many people as well, because maybe it is your case as well. When I was studying and preparing myself for taking this exam, I was not used to read any type of academic material in English. Everything I had read until that moment, okay, when I was preparing for this exam, you know that I have taken it twice in my life. So that in 2020, when I was preparing myself for taking it, I I had a lot of difficulties with this particular section, not just because I didn't, of course, have any of these tips or hacks that I'm going to teach you, but also because, as I say, I was not somebody who was used to read academic literature in English. Okay, so throughout this section, one of my biggest recommendations is going to be always please try to read academic material. That is to say, something that is going to help you a lot in order to improve for this particular section is going to be immerse yourself into this academic and very rigorous field in sciences, in biology, in history, reading books of that sort. Okay, maybe of course you're not going to be an expert. You don't need to in order to take this exam, as I'm going to explain right now. But nonetheless, it's going to be very good and very much useful if you just immerse yourself into it. If you like, for example, biology, begin to read biology books in English, okay? Because that vocabulary, the one that has academic and scientific terms, is going to be very much helpful for you, okay? So now let's begin. General aspects about the TOEFL reading section. Okay, so this section is very simple in the sense that it's designed in order to assess how well can you read and understand the kind of materials used in an academic environment. Remind that most of the people who want to take the exam, the TOEFL exam, want to use it as a means in order to demonstrate to a university that they are able to communicate in English efficiently and that they will be proficient to study and have courses in that institution. It doesn't matter if you're taking an undergraduate degree, graduate degree, of course, you need to demonstrate that you are capable of understanding academic material, right? Academic readings, academic articles, essays, because that is at the end what universities offer, right? And even if you are using this exam as a matter of having a job or getting a job for, I don't know, for an international company, maybe you want to work remotely, as I said, for, I don't know, British company or for an American company, of course, they're going to also ask you to know how to read in English, and particularly for the field, for the professional field, you want to get employed in that company or that institution, all right? So this is a very well organized and prepared section in order to help these institutions, universities, and companies to know if you are able to perform in this particular area. That is to say, to read academic articles, academic essays, and academic reading passages, okay? So let's get into what does it contain. It includes, okay, 3 or 4 reading passages. Okay, this section overall includes 3 or 4 reading passages, each approximately 700 words long, okay, with 10 questions per passage, all right? Let me repeat that. I was saying that it includes 3 or 4 reading passages, each approximately 700 words long, with 10 questions per passage, okay? Now, for example, if you notice here, I say 3 or 4 reading passages for a reason. It is not that this is uncertain. The thing is that, sometimes, okay, pay attention to this. When you are taking this exam and you're taking the reading section, that remind, the reading section is going to be the first section you're going to have in the exam. Please remember that the exam overall or in itself lasts for 3 hours and a half, 3 horas y media. That is the entire duration of the exam. Now, the first section that you're going to have, or the first section that you're going to be tackling and approaching is going to be the reading section, okay? So you're going to have your mind very fresh. You're going to be with all the energy in order to approach this section. And you're going to have from 54 to 72 minutes to answer all the questions in this section that, as I say, has 3 to 4 reading passages. Now, let me explain why is there any variation here. The reason why you can receive whether 3 or 4 reading passages is the following. Sometimes you are going to receive 3 reading passages if you get the normal version of the exam. Because there is an alternative version of this exam that for some test takers on particular days exists. That is to say, maybe you're going to receive the experimental version of the TOEFL exam. And if you receive the experimental version of the TOEFL exam, which is something completely random, okay, esta versión del examen, que es experimental, it's something that happens randomly, por chance. I mean, it can be the one that you're going to receive, or it can be not the case, okay? So what I mean is simply that it doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter if if you receive that particular experimental version, if you receive it, okay, because there is a possibility that you're going to receive it, you are going to receive 1 more passage rather than the normal 3 ones. Normally, this section has 3 reading passages, and you're going to have 54 minutes in order to complete it. But if you receive the experimental version, you're going to have 1 extra reading passage, and you're going to have, of course, 18 minutes more in order to complete the reading passage and the questions that come attained or attached to that particular reading passage, okay? So I think this is very easy to understand. If you are going to receive the normal version, the normal version of the TOEFL exam, you're going to have 3 reading passages. And if it happens to you that you're going to receive the experimental version, which, by the way, I have to mention this, if you receive the experimental version, that extra reading passage you're going to get is not going to be something that is going to be counted towards your score. I repeat, if you receive this extra reading passage, the 4th one, that is to say the experimental one, in which ETS is going to prove maybe some sort of new question, some sort of new structure, some sort of new response, something like that. If you receive that experimental extra passage, that is not going to be counted towards your score. No va a contar para su puntaje. The only thing that is always going to count is going to be these 3 normal and already present reading passages, the ones that I'm going to teach you how to approach. Los que les voy a enseñar cómo resolver, those are the ones that help you in order to get your score. Those are the ones considered in order to get your score. This extra one, experimental one, if you get it, you have to perform on it, you have to do it, you have to resolve it, but that is not going to be important for your score. It's simply a way in which you can help ETS to improve their exams, because, right, as any company, they're always looking forward to improve, right? So by responding to this extra reading passage, you're somehow going to help them in order to improve their mechanisms, their responses, their questions, everything, okay? So that is the reason why there is a possible variation. Maybe 3 reading passages, maybe 4, maybe 54 minutes to complete the section, maybe 72. All depends on whether you receive the experimental version or you don't. If you do, perform it, resolve it with all your ability, with your skills, because as I say, it's not going to be important towards your score. So it doesn't matter, right? You just perform it. So I think that it's clear. And now, last thing, don't worry, okay, this is what I was mentioning at the beginning. Don't worry if you're not familiar with the topic of a passage, because as you're going to be able to observe, as we practice tomorrow, okay, for this particular section, the reading passages you're going to receive are going to be about a great variety of scientific fields. You're going to receive reading passages about biology, history, art, geography, astronomy, mathematics, physics, everything. So don't worry if you don't know anything about mathematics. Don't worry if you are not an expert on biology. Why? Because all the information you need to answer the questions will be included in the passage you are going to receive. Toda la información para resolver las preguntas that are going to be counted towards your score, you are going to have the information necessary there included to respond them. La información para responder las preguntas va a estar incluida en el pasaje que van a leer. So you don't need to be any sort of expert or scientific in order to respond to all these questions correctly. You don't need to, because you don't need to have any external knowledge of this particular subject, because as I say, you're going to use just the knowledge or the data that they offer you through the reading passage, okay? Now, there's even going to be a glossary feature, okay, available to define words not commonly used. But, of course, I want to clarify, this glossary in the reading passage is going to be something, okay, for just endemic words, not something for any word you don't understand. Imagine, for example, that you don't understand the word staggering, right, which means amazing. It doesn't mean that you're going to have a glossary there at the, below in your reading passage to question what is it staggering. I don't understand that word. No, that is not going to happen. You're going to receive a glossary just in the cases that you're going to be reading a passage with endemic words. For example, most of us live in South America, Central America, right? So imagine that somebody from Africa takes this exam, right? Because this is a worldly exam, people around the world take it. So imagine that somebody from Africa takes this exam and he reads a reading passage about the chamanes, right? Chamanes in South America are just people who were magicians, right? People who were able to, well, allegedly to perform magical things, to foretell the future, stuff like that. So because they are Africans, they don't know what a chaman is, right? That word is endemic of South America and Central America. So of course, they're not going to be able to understand that. If that is the case or something similar happens, ETS is going to make sure to include a glossary there in order for you to understand that type of word. Not, of course, as I say, every single word you don't understand. So it's very necessary, and I would say very important, okay, if you go and try to improve your vocabulary before you get into this section. That is to say, throughout your preparation, as I said, try to immerse yourself into this type of vocabularies, into this type of terminologies, so that you are able to understand scientific words, expressions that scientific articles, scientific essays, scientific reading passages have, okay? Because that way you're not going to have that trouble of not understanding many of the words they're presented, okay? My recommendation. Now, before we continue, I want to show you how is this going to look like, okay? So I'm going to right now move on to our Magoosh account. Let me show you this. And you're going to be able to see what I'm talking about, okay? So let me open this so that you have an idea of how is this reading section going to look like on the actual exam, okay? So let me show you this. For example, look at this. Here, this is screen, okay, the one that you're looking right now, which is mine, of course. It's very similar to the screen you're going to be looking at on the actual exam if you're checking the IBT version or, of course, the home IBT edition, right? If you're checking the PBT version, well, of course, it's not going to be a computer, but the material is going to be the same on paper, right? But if you're checking the normal and IBT version, this is going to be the screen you're going to be looking at. So on the right side of your screen, as you can see here, you're going to have the reading passage. For example, in this case, it says Cindy Sherman. Okay, just let's read the first line so that we understand what this is about. It says, Cindy M. Sherman is a famous American artist and photographer. Born in 1954, I'm sorry, Sherman began her career in Buffalo, New York, and emerged as one of the most famous modern artists of the late 20th century. She's best known for photographing herself in nearly all of her pictures and using herself as the focal point of her pieces. Okay, so as you can see, this is a reading passage that in this case is about art. Okay, of course, art is a scientific field that somehow is taught in universities, right? Las universidades enseñan arte, therefore this is part of the variety or of the spectrum that you could receive. Esto es parte de la variedad de pasajes que ustedes podrían recibir. It could be also something about physics, about mathematics, about literature, but as I say, the fact is that on the right side of your screen, on the actual exam, you're going to have the reading passage, okay? So as you can see, it's a large reading passage. It's not that short, okay? Look at this. Look at all the letters here. It contains a lot of information, okay? So you're going to have to read this, okay? Of course, I'm going to teach you what strategy to follow in order to not necessarily having to read the entire passage in order to respond. But the fact is that, as I was saying, on the left side of your screen, if you can look at this, you're going to have the questions, okay? In this case, the questions are always, as I said, going to be related to the information here presented. These questions, for example, this one, which of the following best expresses the essential information in the highlighted sentence? Incorrect answer choices change the meaning in important ways or leave out essential information. This question here is never going to be something external to this passage. Nunca va a ser algo externo a este pasaje. Siempre va a ser información que ya está contenida aquí. So the only thing you have to do is to look for the response for this question here within the reading passage. Okay, so don't worry if you're not familiar with art. Maybe you, just as me, have no idea of what art is about. You have never read something related to art in itself. So the only information you're going to need in order to respond, it's going to be everything here contained. Okay. And of course, as you can see here, you're going to have some possible answers. Okay. Most of the questions in the TOEFL exam are multiple answers or multiple choices. For example, in this case, which of the following best expresses the essential information in the highlighted sentence? In this case, for example, they are asking about this sentence. It says, a student at the University College of Buffalo, New York, Sherman took courses in painting and composition, but did not find the meaning satisfying. So here we will have to choose, as of course, I'm going to explain to you one of these options, and of course, we will have to mark just the correct one. Okay, so this was just a glance, a very, very short and fast glance, so that you know what you are going to find. Okay, now let me proceed, please. I'm going to continue. So now that we have seen all that, is there any question about the general aspects of everything I have said until this point? Please tell me. I'm going to be glad to help you. So please tell me if there are any question, any concern, any doubt you may have about this. Anything?
Teacher, I have a question.
Yes.
About the answer, it could be longer or short?
Okay. What do you mean when you say longer or short? Because the type of responses are super varied. I mean, there are never equal responses. So could you please define a little bit better what you mean by short? What do you mean by short and larger? What do you mean?
How do you say respuestas cortas o respuestas largas?
Okay, respuestas cortas largas. So what I understand is that you are asking, I mean, well, I want to clarify, right? No hay que escribir las respuestas, okay? So the only thing you have to do is to simply choose them. For example, look at my screen. You see the responses and you just click, okay, on the correct answer. So las respuestas, nunca uno, digamos, va a saber si son correctas o falsas dependiendo de cuán largas son, sino yo les voy a enseñar la manera en cómo identificar la respuesta correcta para cada tipo de pregunta. Por ejemplo, esta es una pregunta de negación factual. We're going to get into that right now. Pero este tipo de pregunta tiene una forma de responderse y, como les digo, no tiene mucho que ver con el tema de si es larga o corta. Es más que todo con el patrón que hay que seguir en la pregunta. ¿Ok? I hope that helps.
Okay, okay. Thank you, thank you.
Wonderful. Yes, of course. Laura, you have another question, please?
Yes, I saw some once a question that says like define the word in the second paragraph uh, of the essay, for example, and there's I don't know, a difficult word, and you have to define it's that the type of question that is going to be in the test.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For example, let me show you. Okay, so for example, look at this. There are a lot of type of questions. Okay, for example, I think that you mean this question, which is the vocabulary question. Yes, there is a type of question like that. For example, this one. It could be, it's difficult to get young people to plan for their old age, which seems very distant to them. So at some point in the reading passage, there is going to be somehow a word that is highlighted, okay, a lonely word like this one, for example, distant, and they're going to ask you, what does this word mean? Okay, and you're going to have to respond. We're going to get into this, okay, so please stay with me. We're going to get into this, how to respond this, how to identify them. But yes, in order to respond to the question, yeah, there's one type of question, which is the vocabulary question, which yes, indeed asks for you to respond about the meaning of a word in its context, okay? But we're going to get into that, okay, Laura? Thank you very much for the question. Don't worry about that.
Thank you.
All right, wonderful. So now, before we get into the type of questions, okay, in order to for you to understand a little bit better how to respond to the type of questions, let me tell you about this strategy to approach this section. Why do I tell you this? Because in my experience, as I tell you, I have been taking this exam in the last 2 years of my life. Basically, most of my time in the last 2 years of my life, I was meditating this with my sister the last weekend. I spent most of my time in the last 2 years studying for this exam. So I've met a lot of people who have gone through this process, who have taken the exam, and I have seen a lot of strategies to approach this section. I've seen people who, for example, let me return to my other screen here. I've seen people who like to, before responding to questions, they like to read all the passage. And as you can see, this is a very long passage. It's not something short. But some people simply, they prefer to read the entire passage and then they respond to the questions. Now, there's other approach, which is called, as I was showing you here, the charge strategy to approach the section, which does not require you to read the entire passage. And that is the strategy that I want to propose you to follow. La estrategia que les quiero proponer que ustedes sigan is this one, charge the strategy to approach this section. What do I mean by this strategy? Let me show you. Following this strategy, what you're going to do once receiving your passages is to go directly to the first question and use the passage to respond. Pay attention to that. Following this strategy, what you're going to do once receiving your passages is to go directly to the first question and use the passage to respond, not reading the whole passage first, okay, as I was telling you, other people do. Once you respond, you move on to the next question. You look at your question and respond using, again, the passage, and repeat the process until your last question. This way, you are going to use your passage merely as a means to get over your questions and not vice versa. Let me explain just one more time. As I was telling you, some people, the first thing they do after they receive the reading passage is they read this entirely, all the reading passage. But I propose you that instead of doing that, you should simply, once you receive your passage, go directly and read the first question. Which of the following best expresses the essential information in the highlighted sentence? Of course, in your exam, it's going to be a completely different topic and a completely different question, but the process is the same. You read the first question and you use the reading passage to respond to the first question. You see the difference, right? In this case, you are not reading the reading passage. You are not reading this entire article and then responding to the questions. No, you are using this in order to respond to the questions. That is to say, the only thing you are doing is going to the question and using the reading passage to respond it. You are not reading this entirely before you respond to the questions. Okay, that is the difference. Now, why is this a good strategy? And this is the one that I follow, by the way, and I got 27 in this section out of 30. So why is it that it's good? To follow this strategy, it's possible and beneficial because all questions are released following the chronological order of the passage. Namely, the first question or the first two are going to be about the first paragraph of the passage. The third question about the second paragraph. The fourth question about the third paragraph, and so on. Therefore, you are going to be able to respond orderly without having read the entire passage beforehand. Let me explain it here. For example, in this case, let me move on to another passage so that we can get it clear. So for example, in this case, look at the second question of this same reading passage, okay? It says, which of the following can be inferred from paragraph, okay, can be inferred, I'm sorry, which of the following can be inferred from paragraph 2, look at this, remember this is the question number 2. This is question number 2, okay, of this reading passage. Remind that every single reading passage has 10 different questions, okay? So the question number 2, it's asking you about what? About the paragraph number 2, because if you read again this reading passage, of course you're gonna have more time in order to do that. If you read this reading passage, this is separated in paragraphs. For example, this will be the first paragraph until the top, and from here until the bottom will be the second paragraph until here. Here will be the third paragraph until here, until the point. Here, the fourth paragraph. So as I tell you, every single question, it's always going to ask you in that order. The first question is going to be about the first paragraph. The second question maybe is going to be again about the first paragraph. Maybe the third question is going to be already about the second paragraph. The third about the second paragraph, maybe the fourth is going to be about the fourth paragraph, and so on and so forth. So what you can do is, as I say, you can directly skip the reading passage. That is to say, you don't have to read it entirely. But what you have to do is always go directly to the question. You read the question, okay, which of the following can be inferred for paragraph 2? So given that you know that the answer for this question is in paragraph 2, the only thing that you're going to do is to read the second paragraph. You're not going to read the entire reading passage. No, you're going to read what? This paragraph, the second one. You read, because this is the first one, right? You're going to read the second paragraph. During the 1970s, Cindy Sherman experimented with several forms of art and initially concentrated on oil painting, etc. Okay, so as I say, this is the strategy. Why? Because by doing this, you are going to avoid reading the entire passage, and this is the point. Sometimes not all the information here mentioned, okay, this is super important as well. Not all the information here mentioned, it's something that they ask you about. Muchas veces no les preguntan sobre todo lo que está en el pasaje. Por lo tanto, muchas veces la gente que lo lee completamente todo, they do it in vain, lo hacen en vano. Because they don't are actually questioned nor asked about that information they have read. But sometimes the exam, as I say, and actually most of the time, this is the pattern, it only asks about the first, the second, the third, the fourth paragraph, and then more general questions, which of course I'm going to teach you how to approach. So follow this strategy, okay? Is there any question about this, how this works? Maybe you want me to clarify something? You understand this, how to approach this section through this methodology? Do you understand? Or somebody has any concern here? Anything? Or we are fine. We can move on to the type of questions. Yeah? No questions? All right. Wonderful. So I assume that everything is fine. We're going to move on. Okay? If you have any questions, of course, you can tell me later if you want. So now we are going to arrive to this part, which is, of course, maybe the one that you wanted to hear about, the types of questions you will find in this section. I was talking today with one of my classmates in my university, and I was telling, well, this was a female classmate, and I was telling her that I was an English professor for this company, and I was teaching some people how to take this exam. And she told me, wow, that's incredible. I mean, is it possible to always respond to those questions correctly? And I told her, yes, it's possible. Why? Because there is a pattern. Hay un patrón en las preguntas. They are always similar. Las preguntas son siempre parecidas. There are some categories, types of questions. Hay categorías, tipos de preguntas. So that if I teach you and you understand how to approach every single type of question, you are going to be super able, and you're going to do it easily to respond effectively to all these questions all the time. Even if you are not super familiarized, and even if you don't understand completely the reading passage, if you know what the questions are asking about, which is what I'm going to teach you, the pattern, los patrones, then you're going to understand the question, even if you don't understand the topic fully, okay? So please pay attention to this. I'm going to teach you those patterns, those type of questions you are going to find in this section, okay? So let's go with the first one. This is actually the one that Laura was asking about, the vocabulary question, which is one of the most common one and one of the most easy and simple questions to respond. Okay, so let's get into this. The TOEFL reading vocabulary question. So the TOEFL reading vocabulary questions are designed to test your knowledge of words or phrases that are commonly used in academic or non-academic contexts. Each vocabulary item consists of a sentence with one word or phrase highlighted. Let me show you an example, and you're going to understand it super clearly. Okay, so as I was saying, imagine that this here on the right side of my screen is a little portion of a reading passage, okay? It says, it's difficult to get young people to plan for their old age, which seems very distant to them. So the question in this case, okay, would be something like this. What does the word distant mean in the context? That would be the question. What does the word distant mean in the context? I'm actually going to write it down. I don't know why it's not here. Okay, so the question would be, let me write it down so you understand it. The question would be, what does the word distant, which just as you can see, it's highlighted, right? Distant, mean in this context? That would be. What does the word distant mean in this context? This is the vocabulary question. This is a super common one. Okay, this is a type of questions you also find in the normal exams in every country, from Peru, from El Salvador. Doesn't matter. This type of questions never lack, right? So, how to approach this one? Let me teach you. Okay, so let's think about the possibilities. So, what does the word distant mean in this context? It's difficult to get young people to plan for their old age, which seems very distant to them. So what does the word distant mean in this context? We have some options. It means impossible, it means far away, it means observable, or fearful. Those are the options, okay? Before we respond, let's get into some recommendations for the vocabulary questions, okay? So make sure to write down these recommendations because they are very important, I think, okay? So even if you think, okay, listen to this. Even if you think you know what the word could mean, remind that the context is the transcendental source that gives each word its meaning. Okay? I'm going to repeat. Even if you think you know what the word could mean, remind that the context is a transcendental source that gives each word its meaning. I give a super clear example. I'm gonna use a Spanish word. Imagínense de que yo les digo banco. How are you going to understand what does the word banco mean? You're going to understand what do I mean or what I'm trying to express with banco according to the context I use for the sentence. Imagine that I say, estoy sentado en el banco con mis amigos. What would you understand that banco means in that sentence? Of course, a place where, or an object where you can be sit or sat upon, right? You can be sat there upon that banco, en ese banco se puede sentar sobre él. And because of the sentence, the context, right? The words surrounding the word banco, estoy en el banco sentado con mis amigos. You understand that when I'm talking about banco, I'm saying, okay, el objeto de madera en el que uno se sienta. But what if I tell you, estoy en el banco haciendo transacciones? Estoy en el banco haciendo transacciones. What are you going to understand when I say that sentence and I mean banco? What do I mean by banco? Estoy en el banco haciendo transacciones. Of course, I'm meaning the bank, right? Where you are going to get a loan, to borrow money, to, I don't know, to save money, to retire money. That place would be what I mean by the word bank in that particular context. But in other contexts, as the verse that I gave you, estoy sentado en el banco con mis amigos, banco significa otra cosa, okay? So even if you know, for example, what the word distant means, normally or in different contexts, you don't have to let that particular information you have to guide you. What is the good criterion here to determine what does this word mean? ¿Cuál es el criterio que tienen que seguir para saber qué significa la palabra subrayada? Simply, context. Context is what you have to look for. Read the word in its context to know its true meaning. El contexto es lo que les dice el significado de la palabra context. Read the word in its context to know its true meaning. That is what you have to do. For example, in this context, it's difficult to get young people to plan for their old age, which seems very distant to them. In this context, what does the word distant mean? Of course, in this context, the word means far away, right? Because we're talking about young people to plan for their old age, which seems very distant to them. Far away. Why far away? Because when you are young, of course, right? You don't want to think about being an adult, to have a family, having babies, because you say, "Oh man, come on, that's far away," right? I mean, I don't know, 17 years old. I don't want to be a father. I don't want to think about my life as an adult. I just want to have fun with my friends. I don't want to work, everything, right? Because you believe that adult age or adult epoch for your life is distant, it's far away. You still have to go through a lot of years in order to get there. So here in this context, the word distant means far away. But notice, for example, that the same word distant could also mean impossible in other contexts. For example, if I tell you, being the president of the nation, it's very distant from me. I repeat, being the president of the nation, it's very distant from me. In that case, of course, I'm not meaning far away, right? Because there is not a time in which I'm going to be a president. No, what I mean is impossible, right? If I say, no, being the president of the nation, it's very distant from me. I don't mean that at some point in time, I am sure that I'm going to be president. No, maybe I'm going to be, who knows? But what I'm trying to express is that it's impossible, super difficult, right? It's very distant for me. So notice the word could mean different things depending on the context. So let the context guide you every single time you receive a question like this, because it's always like this. What does the word distant mean in this context? What does the highlighted phrase or the highlighted word means in this context? It's always like that. Read the context, read the words surrounding the highlighted word, okay? In order to do, or when you do that, you're going to understand the context, okay? Is it clear? Any question about this? Anything? Any question? Any concern?
No.
No? Okay, wonderful. Let's move on. Second type of question, okay? Okay, so we get into the purpose question, okay? This is another type of questions. Listen to this. The type of reading purpose questions will test your ability to understand why a certain idea or argument has been used in the text. I repeat, the type of reading purpose questions will test your ability to understand why a certain idea or argument has been used in the text. They will ask you to draw conclusions about the information that has been stated in the passage. You need to locate the paragraph and read briefly to get the purpose. Let me show you an example, okay? So look at the right side of my computer. You can read there a paragraph, let's say, or a portion of a reading passage. And on the left side, of course, I have the question. So In this case, just because we need to understand, right, what we are talking about, let's read the paragraph, okay? Let's read together, okay? So please look at the right side of my screen, because of course we are not reading the entire paragraph. We are just trying to read this portion, right? So let's read it, and then we are going to be able to understand the example of the purpose questions, okay? So let's read together. It says, if true though, why did cold-blooded animals such as snakes, lizards, turtles, and crocodiles survive the freezing winters and torrid summers? These animals are at the mercy of the climate to maintain a livable body temperature. It's hard to understand why they would not be affected, whereas dinosaurs were left too crippled to cope, especially if, as some scientists believe, dinosaurs were warm-blooded. Critics also point out that the shallow seaways had retreated from and advanced on the continents numerous times during the Mesozoic. So why did the dinosaurs survive the climatic changes associated with the earlier fluctuations, but not with this one? Although initially appealing, the hypothesis of a simple climatic change related to sea levels is insufficient to explain all the data. Okay, so that will be a portion of a reading passage that in this case, of course, will be, as you were able to notice, about the extinction of dinosaurs, right? And here we're talking about a theory that they have that some sort of fluctuations in the waters in the Mesozoic time caused the extinction of dinosaurs, right? So that is the passage. That is what the passage is about. Now, let's get into the question. Why does the author mention the survival of snakes, of lizards or turtles, and crocodiles in paragraph 3? Remind that at the beginning of our reading passage here in the portion, the author mentions snakes, lizards, turtles, and crocodiles. So the question, okay, the purpose question is asking, why? Okay, the purpose, right? El propósito. Why? ¿Por qué? Why does the author mention the survival of snakes, lizards, turtles, and crocodiles in paragraph 3? Okay, so what we will have to do is to read this and to find a response for this particular question. So before we respond, let's read the possible options, okay? It says, to argue that dinosaurs may have become extinct because they were not cold-blooded animals. Again, to argue that dinosaurs may have become extinct because they were not cold-blooded animals. To question the adequacy of the hypothesis that climatic change related to sea levels caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. 3, to present examples of animals that could maintain a livable body temperature more easily than dinosaurs. To support hypotheses that these animals were not as sensitive to climate changes in the Cretaceous period as they are today. All right, so those will be the possible answers. There's of course just one correct answer, but before we respond, let's get into some recommendations. Okay, let's get into this. So, recommendations for the vocabulary question. To effectively respond this type of question, you must ask yourself, okay, this question. How does the alluded portion, how does the alluded portion affect the whole text? I repeat, how does the alluded portion, which in this case is snakes, lizards, turtles, and crocodiles, affect the whole text? It could, for example, or it might initiate, it might conclude, it might support, or it might discard something. Esa porción podría iniciar algo, podría concluir algo, podría apoyar algo o descartar algo. Pay attention as well to the alluded portion's mode. Presten atención al modo que tiene la expresión aludida. It could be interrogative, it could be exclamative, it could be subjunctive, and so forth. ¿Ok? El modo de una sentencia, cómo está escrita, si es exclamativa, interrogativa, si es subjuntiva, indicativa, nos dice mucho. Okay, so go back to the basics, to the text that you use in order to learn English and try to remind what was interrogative, exclamative, subjunctive, indicative. Vayan a sus libros de inglés donde aprendieron a hablar inglés, vuelvan a leer esas cosas porque that grammar here is super important. Okay, so these are the things you have to consider. Why? Because, for example, if you consider how does this alluded portion affect the whole text, then you are going to understand why is the author, el autor, right? Why is the author putting that particular phrase or line in the passage? If you understand how it affects the entire text, right? For example, in this case, if true, why did cold-blooded animals such as snakes, lizards, turtles, and crocodiles survive the freezing winters and torrid summers? Here, if you think about it, this is not only the, okay, here we could apply, for example, the second recommendation. What is the mode? ¿Cuál es el modo de esta sentencia, de esta oración? El modo de esta sentencia que es interrogativa. And I ask you, why do we make questions? ¿Por qué hacemos preguntas cuando escribimos algo? The reason why we normally make questions, and actually most of the time, is because we want to question something. Escribimos preguntas en un ensayo, en un documento, cuando queremos cuestionar algo. So the fact that here this sentence is a question, is interrogative in its mood, it gives you a hint, les da una pista de por qué es que el autor pone esa particular frase ahí. And in this case, the hint, okay, the clue would be that it is questioning something, right? Está cuestionando algo. So try to follow that criteria. Presten la atención. ¿Qué tipo de modo tiene la sentencia, la oración? En este caso es interrogativa. So if it is interrogative, then it's probably questioning something. Also, as I say, question yourself, how does this auxiliary portion affect the whole text? And if you read again, this affects the text by after the author mentions this phrase, he says, so why if these cold-blooded animals, which are so fragile, estos animales de sangre fría, como las tortugas, las víboras, etc., si ellas son de sangre fría, fragile, frágiles, if they survive the climatic changes, why didn't the dinosaurs do exactly the same? ¿Por qué no los dinosaurios hicieron lo mismo? Si para colmo, los dinosaurios were warm-blooded, los dinosaurios eran sangre caliente, no eran tan fragile, no eran tan frágiles. So if you think about it, I'm so sorry, I know somebody just got into my house again. So if you think about it, okay, if you think about it, what is happening is that somebody, or the author here in this case, is trying to make you think, why if these animals so fragile, tan frágiles, sobrevivieron, why these other animals more powerful, as dinosaurs didn't? ¿Por qué estos más poderosos no sobrevivieron? So the reason why the author puts this and how it affects the whole passage is by questioning, está cuestionando. Te quiere hacer pensar, razonar. So the correct answer here in this case would be to question the adequacy of the hypothesis that climatic changes related to sea levels cause the extinction of the dinosaurs. That will be the correct answer. I'm following the three criteria here, if you think about it, right? So, is there any question with regard to this type of question? Purpose questions, any hesitation, any concern about this? Anything? No questions? Okay, so remind that the way to identify this purpose question is that it always begins by why, right? ¿Por qué? When we ask por qué, why, we're actually questioning, asking, trying to get somebody to respond to us about purposes, propósito, razones, right? So why does the author mention the survival of snake, lizards, turtles, and crocodiles? It's obviously because he's trying to question something. In this case, it's a purpose question. It's trying to make you think, why, por qué? ¿Cuál es el propósito? So that is the way you're going to identify this type of question when you read the wording of the question. Why does the author mention this? Why does the author state this? Why does the author include this? Those are going to be the wordings of these questions. Eso van a ser los parafraseos de las preguntas. And then you're going to be able to identify this type of questions. Van a poder identificar la pregunta cuando vean eso. ¿Por qué el autor menciona? ¿Por qué incluye? ¿Por qué esto? ¿Por qué esto? It's a purpose question. All right? Any question now? Any concern? Anything that you may want to question about? Is there anything? No questions? Okay. So here's where we are going to stop. Tomorrow we're going to continue. Don't worry. Tomorrow we're going to practice too. We're going to have a lot of practice. We're going to continue with the type of questions, because there are actually 10 type of questions. We have just seen 2 of them, but it was very good because we have had, I think, the time to examine them very much thoroughly, muy minuciosamente, and that is what I want you to understand, okay? So before you go, I'm gonna take the assistant, so please don't go, okay? And please, I told this as well to the new students, every single time we finish, okay, la clase, cada vez que terminamos la clase, hay esta encuesta, ok, diaria, que es anónima. Así que les rogaría, por favor, que la llenen honestamente. Me ayudarían muchísimo haciéndolo y respondiendo, por supuesto, muy bien, ok. Muchísimas gracias y voy a llamar la asistencia ahora, ok. Entonces, cuando escuchen su nombre, when you listen to your name, you say present. So let me see here the list. Okay, for example, is here Claudia Patricia Jennifer?
Yes, present.
Wonderful, thank you very much. What about Laura Leticia Mamani?
Percentage.
All right, thank you very much. ¿Qué tal Chayapa Álvaro?
Here, teacher, present.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Álvaro. ¿Qué tal Jessica Gutiérrez?
Present, teacher.
All right, thank you. What about Miguel Ángel Silva?
Present, teacher.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And now the new students, what about, for example, Cerruto Natalia Fernanda?
Here.
Wonderful, thank you very much. ¿Qué tal Sebastián Emilio Cerruto?
Here.
Wonderful, thank you very much. ¿Y qué tal Manzaneda Paola Alejandra?
Present, teacher.
Thank you very much. Okay, so full class today. Wonderful. I like that. So thank you very much for your responses. And tomorrow we're going to continue with this. Again, recommendation, immerse yourself into this. Read biology books, science books, astronomy, art, history, whatever you can find, whatever you like. Read those type of materials because that is what is going to be helpful, okay? To improve vocabulary, don't read novels, okay? This is not the time to read novels. Read scientific, academic books, okay? Thank you very much and have a wonderful night, all right? See you tomorrow.
Bye, teacher.
Bye-bye.
Bye, teacher. Teacher.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.